Hi, Berkshire County 8th graders. My name is Danielle Adams, and I'm here as one of the presenters of the Strive Youth Conference. Unfortunately, the conference did have to be canceled this year, but I'm really excited to still be able to present to you all from your homes, and I think we're gonna have a lot of fun. So today, I'm here to present the first part of my presentation, Be the First, sponsored by CVS Health. Now, in order to know what Be the First means, you will need to stick with me until the end and make sure to watch all the videos that follow. So let's go ahead and get started. The only thing that you'll need for this presentation is a piece of paper and something to write with. So if you don't have that nearby, go and grab one now. And what I want you to do is to write down whatever comes to mind when I ask, what stereotypes are there about middle school students? What do people say and think in society about 8th graders, teenagers, middle schoolers? Write down whatever comes to mind. Okay, hopefully you have a few things down on paper or at least in your heads. Now I want to share with you a few things that I've heard, not that I think, but some things that I've heard myself about middle school students. People sometimes say that middle schoolers can be lazy. They can be dramatic, disrespectful, obsessed with their phones and social media, troublemakers, immature, don't really know too much about stuff. My guess is that you've heard some of these things too. Maybe you even wrote some of them down. But what I'm going to tell you over the course of several presentations is that these words don't define who you are as people, who you are as young people. Young people are actually incredibly important and responsible for a lot of great things that have happened in the world. Now, we're going to get there a little bit later, but before we get there, I am going to spend some time talking to you about tobacco and vaping. So if you didn't know what this presentation was about before, now you do, but don't turn it off yet because I'm going to try to make this as fun as possible. So we're going to talk a lot about vaping today, but we're also going to talk about cigarettes. And the difference is shown here because we can't talk about vaping without talking about cigarettes. Now, my first question for you is, how many of you know someone your age who smokes regular cigarettes, like the ones in the top left-hand corner? Think about it for a second. My guess is not many of you know people your age who smoke cigarettes. Maybe you know someone older, like a parent or grandparent, aunt or uncle, maybe a neighbor, maybe even an older sibling who smokes cigarettes, but not many of you probably know people in 8th grade, in middle school, that smoke cigarettes. And that's because you guys have done better than the generations before you and the people older than you who smoked for a really long time. In fact, cigarette smoking has decreased by 72% over the course of 10 years, which is a lot. Back in 2007, the percentage of middle school students who smoked cigarettes was 15.5%. And a couple years ago in 2017, it was just over 4%. And the percentage of middle school students who currently or regularly used cigarettes in 2007 was 5%, and now it's less than 1%. So that means that right now, less than 1% of middle school students smoke cigarettes, which is incredible. And that's because you all are smart. You are smarter than the generations before you, and you've almost completely eliminated a behavior that's intended to kill you. You all were this close to becoming the first tobacco-free generation. Now let's let that sink in for a moment. People have been smoking for centuries, and your generation was the first to almost completely eliminate that behavior altogether, which is huge because we know that smoking is the single leading cause of preventable death in the United States. And tobacco is the only product that kills half of its consumers. So it's a really big deal that your generation and people your age aren't smoking anymore. So give yourself a round of applause for that. It's incredible work that was done by young people. But then something happened, something that really changed the way people saw young people. And instead of celebrating all of that progress, instead of talking about all of the great things young people are doing, these were the kinds of things that we were seeing in the news, that we entered a teen vaping epidemic. And that vaping use is exploding over our high schools, our middle schools, and even some of our elementary schools. So we are going to talk about vaping. So let's first figure out what a vape actually is and what's inside of them. It's made up of three main components. The first is the highly addictive drug nicotine. The second are harmful chemicals, and the third are flavors that make it smell and taste the way that they do. Now, these chemicals that I say are harmful are some of the same chemicals found in things like car exhaust, found in formaldehyde, which is the chemical that preserves dead things like animals and even dead bodies. And in these vapes can be found heavy metals like nickel, tin, and lead. So not things that we want to be putting into our bodies. Some of the side effects from these chemicals include, but aren't limited to, headaches, dizziness, nausea, vomiting, excessive thirst, skin and eye irritation, damage to the organs, and can be toxic to your central nervous system, just to name a few. One chemical that's found inside of some vape flavors is diacetyl or diacetyl, which is linked to an irreversible and deadly lung disease called popcorn lung. Years ago, people who worked in popcorn factories were getting this disease and killing them, which is why it's called popcorn lung. And that same chemical that people were getting sick from then is now contained in vapes and is starting to make people sick now. A second misconception that I want to address is that a lot of people think that the smoke you're seeing come out of a vape is just water. It's water vapor, and so it can't really hurt you at all. And that's just not true. It's not water, and it's not actually a vapor at all, which doesn't make sense because it's called a vape. What it is I'll give you a little example. Let's say you like to make mac and cheese like I do. And the first thing that you want to do if you're going to make mac and cheese is to boil some water. And as you do, hopefully you're not standing over it waiting for it to boil, but I typically do that. And you'll start to see a steam coming up from the water. And that means that it's boiling. That's water vapor. It's water being heated and turned into a vapor. Now, this that we're seeing on the screen looks a lot different than the smoke that comes out of a vape like that. And that's because it is very different. This is just water, and this has a lot of chemicals inside of it that make it smell, look, and taste the way that it does. And a lot of it is harmful to our bodies. Now, I want you to think about one thing before we continue. Answer to this question, yes or no. Are cigarettes bad for you? Hopefully you're all nodding your heads yes, because of course cigarettes are bad for you. We all know that, and we've known that for a really long time. But my second question is, how long do you think people have been smoking cigarettes for? Is it A, 150 years, B, 2,000 years, or C, 500 years? If you said 2,000 years, you'd be correct. People have been smoking cigarettes for 2,000 years, but it took that long before we knew that cigarettes can cause lung cancer, throat cancer, mouth cancer, heart attacks, and strokes. So for thousands of years, people were using these products before we realized just how bad they are for us. Vapes have only been around for a little over a decade, so we just don't know what effects they're going to have on our body long-term, years from now. Because research to find out if something is bad for you is really slow. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in 5 years, 10 years. It takes decades and sometimes centuries of people using a product and getting sick before we realize just how bad that it is. But we do know that there have been some deaths linked to vaping that we've seen in the news. This is called a VALI, or e-cigarette or vaping product use associated lung injury. In the United States, there's been over 2,700 cases of a VALI and over 60 deaths. And in our own state of Massachusetts, there's been over 80 cases and actually 5 deaths because one has been reported since I made this presentation. So as of February, at least 5 people in our state have died from vaping. And the big question is always, what were they vaping? Well, some of these people were vaping just THC, some of them were vaping nicotine and THC, and some of them were just vaping nicotine. So what this tells us is that vaping any of these substances could potentially lead to us getting sick or even worse. So I'm going to stop there. I have a lot more information to share with you, but I'm going to pick this back up in my second video. Thanks for listening, and tune in to part 2 of Be the First.